On my birthday, my husband and daughters kicked me out. We don't need you. I smiled and left. They didn't know I owned the land they stood on. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The silence in the living room was loud enough to break glass. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had come down the stairs in my favorite navy blue dress, the one Arthur used to say brought out the color of my eyes, expecting perhaps a small cake, maybe a toast to 60 years of life. Instead, I found a tribunal. My husband, Arthur, sat in his leather armchair, the one I had reupholstered with my own hands 2 years ago, looking like a king on a throne he hadn't paid for. To his left stood Mallory, my eldest daughter, clutching a leather briefcase against her chest like a shield. To his right was Tiffany, scrolling through her phone, barely bothering to look up as I entered the room. And in the center of the coffee table, where a birthday cake should have been, sat a thick stack of legal documents. "Sit down, Lorraine," Arthur said. His voice didn't hold a shred of warmth. It was the tone he used for subcontractors who were late on a delivery. Business. Cold, hard business. I didn't sit. I stood by the archway, my hands folded calmly in front of me. "I assume this isn't a surprise party," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Mallory stepped forward. She didn't look like my little girl anymore. At 38, she looked like a shark in a tailored suit. "We need to talk about the future, Mother. The company's future. And the family's." "The family structure is changing," Arthur interrupted, picking up a glass of scotch. It was 10 in the morning. "I'm filing for divorce, Lorraine. The papers are all there. Irreconcilable differences." I looked at him. 32 years. We had built this life from dust and sweat in the Arizona heat. I had carried his children, balanced his books, and cleaned up his messes. "On my birthday, Arthur?" "It seemed like a good milestone for a fresh start," he said, taking a sip. "Charlene is moving in next week. She understands the modern direction the business needs to take. You're tired, Lorraine. You're old. You're holding us back." Tiffany finally looked up from her screen, a smirk playing on her lips. "Don't make this difficult, Mom. Daddy just wants to be happy. Besides, Charlene is actually fun. She's going to help me launch my fashion line properly. You never understood my vision." "Your vision involves spending company profits on trips to Milan," I said softly. "See?" Tiffany threw her hands up. "Always criticizing. This is exactly why we voted you out." "Voted me out?" I raised an eyebrow. Mallory placed the stack of papers in my hands. "I've drawn up the settlement agreement, Mother. It's generous, considering you're just a housewife on paper. We're offering you the old Honda, your personal effects, and a small monthly stipend for 2 years. In exchange, you sign over your voting rights in the construction firm and vacate the property immediately. Today." I looked down at the documents. The legal jargon was dense, clearly designed to intimidate someone who didn't know better. Mallory was a lawyer, after all. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought she had trapped me. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, looking at Arthur. He sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Then we go to court. We'll expose your mental decline. Mallory has statements prepared. We'll drag this out until your legal fees eat up every penny of your retirement. You'll leave with nothing, Lorraine. This way, at least you get the car." "Get out, Mom," Tiffany added, checking her nails. "Seriously. It's embarrassing." I looked at them. My family. The people I had cooked for, cared for, and loved with every fiber of my being. I looked at Arthur, the man whose hand I had held through bankruptcy and boom times. I looked at Mallory, whose law school tuition I had paid by working double shifts managing job sites. I looked at Tiffany, whose every mistake I had quietly fixed. They expected tears. They expected screaming. They expected me to fall to my knees and beg for mercy. They wanted the satisfaction of breaking me. Instead, I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. It was the feeling of a heavy burden finally being lifted. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the expensive Montblanc pen Arthur loved so much, a gift I had bought him 5 years ago, and flipped to the signature page. "You're right," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I am tired. Tired of fixing things that are broken beyond repair." Arthur blinked, surprised by my lack of resistance. Mallory narrowed her eyes, scanning my face for a trap. I signed my name. Lorraine V. Brennan. The ink flowed smoothly. "Done," I said, capping the pen and setting it down with a soft click. "Thank you. This makes everything so much simpler." I turned and walked toward the front door. "Wait," Arthur called out, unsettled by my composure. "Where are you going?" "You need to pack your things." "I packed a suitcase 3 days ago," I lied smoothly. "It's in the trunk of the Honda. The rest, you can keep it. The furniture, the paintings, the memories. Keep it all. It matches the house." I grabbed my purse from the entry table. Inside, tucked safely in the zippered lining, was a small, silver USB drive. It contained 6 terabytes of data. It was the key to the kingdom, and they didn't even know it existed. "Goodbye, Arthur," I said, opening the heavy oak door. "Enjoy your fresh start. I hope Charlene is everything you deserve." I walked out into the blinding Phoenix sun. The heat hit me, dry and familiar. I marched to my old Honda, the one they mocked, and slid into the driver's seat. As I turned the key and the engine sputtered to life, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the silhouette of my husband watching from the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. He thought he had one. He thought he had discarded a used-up wife to make room for a younger, flashier model. He thought he had secured his empire. He had no idea that I had just signed his death warrant. Thank you so much for watching. If you are still listening to my story, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know that you are wonderful, and I understand that you are accompanying me on this journey. Your help is a huge encouragement, cheering me on. Please comment number 1 so I can recognize you, and now, let me continue telling you my story. I drove for 40 minutes until the sprawling estates of Paradise Valley faded into the dusty, neon-lit strip of budget motels on the edge of town. I checked into the frantic anonymity of a roadside inn, room 204. It smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, a far cry from the Egyptian cotton sheets and central air conditioning I had woken up to this morning. But as I locked the deadbolt and sat on the lumpy mattress, I felt safer than I had in months. They thought this divorce was a sudden ambush, a birthday surprise they had sprung on a clueless old woman. They were wrong. My birthday gift to myself hadn't been that signature, it had been the 6 months of preparation that led up to it. The first crack in the illusion appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I had been at the office, Brennan Construction, the company Arthur and I founded 30 years ago, looking for an invoice in the archives. Technically, I was retired. Arthur had pushed me out of daily operations 5 years ago, saying I deserved to rest, but the truth was, he didn't want me looking over his shoulder. I found a bank statement that had slipped behind a filing cabinet. It was for an account I didn't recognize. A corporate account under a shell company name, Blue Sky Consulting. Curiosity is a dangerous thing for a happy marriage, but vital for a smart businesswoman. I dug deeper. I still had the administrator passwords for our server, something Arthur, in his arrogance, had forgotten to revoke. What I found made my stomach turn. Monthly transfers of $10,000 to Blue Sky Consulting. Expenses for client entertainment at jewelry stores and five-star resorts in Sedona. And the registered agent for Blue Sky Consulting? Charlene Miller. I knew who she was. We all did. She was the widow of a real estate developer we used to work with. A woman who wore too much perfume and touched men's arms when she laughed. I had seen her at charity galas, clinging to Arthur like expensive ivy. I didn't confront him. Not then. I went home, cooked his favorite pot roast, and watched him eat it. I watched him smile at me, ask about my day, and lie to my face without blinking. That night, lying next to him, listening to his snoring, I realized the man I loved was gone. In his place was a stranger who was stealing our retirement to fund a mistress. The next day, I hired a private investigator, but more importantly, I hired a lawyer. Not the family attorney who played golf with Arthur, but a ruthless specialist in asset protection named Sarah. Don't file for divorce yet, Sarah had advised me, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. If you confront him now, he'll hide the assets. He'll manipulate the books. He'll turn your daughters against you before you have a chance to speak. We need evidence. We need to let him hang himself. So, I became a ghost in my own life. I installed hidden cameras in Arthur's home office and the living room. It was surprisingly easy. You can buy them online for $50, disguised as smoke detectors or USB chargers. For 6 months, I watched Arthur and Charlene drinking wine on my sofa while I was visiting my sister. When is the old hag going to die? Charlene had asked once, kicking her feet up on my coffee table. She's healthy as a horse, Arthur had groaned. Divorce is too expensive. She owns half the shares. Not if we force her out, Charlene had purred, running a hand through his hair. Make her life miserable. Isolate her. Get the girls on our side. Mallory needs money for that debt she's hiding, right? And Tiffany is an idiot, she'll do anything for a new car. Hearing my husband agree to turn our children against me broke my heart, but it hardened my resolve. It was the fuel I needed. I started moving pieces on the chessboard. I couldn't move the joint assets without alerting him, but I had something he didn't know about. My parents had passed away 2 years ago, leaving me a modest but significant inheritance. Arthur assumed I had put it into the joint savings. I hadn't. I had kept it in a separate trust. It was my war chest. Every night, while Arthur slept, I would creep downstairs to his computer. I copied everything. Every fraudulent invoice. Every email between him and Mallory discussing how to structure the hostile takeover of my shares. Every text message from Tiffany complaining about how Mom is so embarrassing and asking for more money. I learned that Mallory wasn't just in debt, she was laundering money through her law firm to cover bad crypto investments. I learned that Tiffany had sold company equipment, 2 bulldozers, and pocketed the cash, claiming they were stolen. Arthur knew about it all and covered for them. He bought their loyalty with my money. By the time my birthday arrived, I wasn't a victim. I was a prosecutor building a case. Sitting in that motel room, I opened my laptop and plugged in the silver USB drive. The screen flickered to life, displaying folders neatly labeled fraud, adultery, theft, and conspiracy. I opened a bottle of cheap wine I had bought at the gas station. It tasted like vinegar compared to Arthur's cellar collection, but as I drank it, I tasted something else, freedom. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. Hope you found a place. Don't try to come back to the house. I changed the alarm codes. I didn't reply. I just took a sip of wine and opened the folder marked IRS violations. Happy birthday to me, I whispered to the empty room. The air conditioning unit in the motel room rattled and coughed, struggling against the relentless Arizona heat outside. It reminded me of the old days. The days before the mansions and the country clubs. The days when Brennan Construction was just me, Arthur, and a beat-up Ford pickup truck that overheated every time we drove uphill. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. I needed to remember where I came from to understand where I was going. 35 years ago, Phoenix was a different city. Dustier. Emptier. I was 25, the daughter of a bricklayer. While other girls were learning to type or nursing, I was on job sites with my father, learning the difference between poor-grade cement and the stuff that would last 100 years. I had rough hands. I had dirt under my fingernails. I could read a blueprint better than I could read a recipe. Then I met Arthur. He was a salesman for a lumber yard. Handsome, charming, with a smile that could sell ice to a polar bear. He had soft hands. He didn't know how to frame a wall, but he knew how to shake hands with the developers and the bank managers. He had the dream, but I had the skill. We were partners. That's what I told myself. You handle the build, Lorraine, he would say, flashing that winning smile. I'll handle the business. I'll get us the contracts. So I did. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I was the one waking up at 4 a.m. to meet the concrete trucks. I was the one arguing with subcontractors in the blistering sun. I was the one climbing scaffolding while 7 months pregnant with Mallory, shouting orders because the foreman was drunk. Arthur? Arthur was at lunch meetings. Arthur was buying suits. Arthur was joining the Chamber of Commerce. When the company started making real money, the dynamic shifted. Arthur began to resent the fact that the crew respected me more than him. They called me boss lady. They called him the suit. I remembered the night Arthur won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. It was 15 years ago. We were at a gala in a ballroom that smelled of lilies and money. I was wearing a dress I felt uncomfortable in, my hands hidden under the table because the calluses snagged on the silk tablecloth. Arthur went up to the podium to accept the crystal trophy. The spotlight hit him, making him look golden and perfect. He gave a 10-minute speech about vision, hard work, and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. He thanked his banker. He thanked his golf buddies. He thanked the mayor. He didn't mention me. Not once. When he sat back down, flushed with applause, I whispered, "You forgot someone." He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard, a look I would come to know well. "Don't embarrass me, Lorraine. You just keep the books." I built this image. Nobody wants to hear that my wife lays the bricks. It ruins the mystique. That was the seed. The seed of resentment that grew into the poisonous tree that had just crashed down on top of me. Arthur hated that he needed me. He hated that every time he looked at a finished building, he knew I was the one who made sure it didn't collapse, while he just cut the ribbon. He cheated on me not because he stopped loving me, but because he wanted to be worshipped. Charlene didn't know the difference between rebar and drywall. To her, Arthur was a titan of industry. She fed his ego in a way I never could, because I knew the truth. I knew he was just a shiny suit with nothing inside. And the girls. Mallory and Tiffany grew up watching this. They saw their father as the hero, the provider, the star. They saw me as the help. The nagging mother who was always tired, always covered in dust, always checking the budget. Arthur taught them that money was magic. You wave a hand, and things appear. I tried to teach them that money was sweat. You work until your back aches, and then you get paid. They chose his lesson. It was easier. I looked down at my hands now. They were older, spotted with age, but still strong. The manicure Tiffany had forced me to get for my birthday was chipped. Good. I peeled off the polish, revealing the sturdy, practical nails underneath. Arthur thought he had stripped me of my power by taking the company title and the house. He forgot that titles don't build skyscrapers. Foundations do. And I was the foundation. I wasn't just going to take half in the divorce. I was going to remind him who actually knew how to run the machine he had stolen. Without me, Brennan Construction was just a shiny car with no engine. And I had the keys to the garage. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Hello?" a gruff voice answered. It was Hector, the foreman who had been with us since the beginning. The man Arthur had fired last month for being too old school. "Hector," I said. "It's Lorraine. Are you looking for work?" "Mrs. B?" He sounded surprised. "I thought you retired." "I did," I said, a smile touching my lips for real this time. "But retirement is boring. How would you like to help me build something new? Something that's going to bury Arthur Brennan?" There was a pause, and then a low, gravelly chuckle. "Mrs. B, for you? I'd bring my own shovel. If losing a husband is like losing a limb, losing your children to greed is like watching them drown while you stand tied to the shore. I could handle Arthur's betrayal. I expected it from a man whose ego required constant feeding. But Mallory and Tiffany? That was a wound that refused to close. Sitting in that dim motel room, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled The Girls. It wasn't full of baby photos or graduation videos. It was full of bank statements, credit card bills, and transcripts of conversations I wished I had never heard. I needed to understand how my sweet little girls, whom I had read bedtime stories to and nursed for chickenpox, had turned into the monsters who handed me an eviction notice on my birthday. It started with Mallory. My brilliant, sharp-tongued Mallory. She had always been ambitious. I encouraged it. I wanted her to have the education I never did. When she got into law school, I cried. I paid every cent of her tuition so she wouldn't graduate with debt. But somewhere along the way, Mallory stopped wanting to be successful and started wanting to be powerful. And rich. Quickly. The documents on my screen told the story. 3 years ago, Mallory made partner at her firm. What she didn't tell us was that she had bought her way in using money she didn't have. She had taken up massive loans to invest in a cryptocurrency scheme that a boyfriend had promised was a sure thing. It crashed. She lost everything. Nearly $500,000. Instead of coming to me, she went to Arthur. And Arthur, being Arthur, didn't offer to help her solve the problem. He offered to hide it. I clicked on an email chain between them dated 8 months ago. Subject: the inheritance issue. From Mallory Brennan. To Arthur Brennan. Dad, the creditors are calling the firm. If the senior partners find out I'm insolvent, I lose my license. I need the trust fund Grandma left for Mom. You said you could access it. From Arthur Brennan. To Mallory Brennan. Mallory, honey, your mother has that locked down. But if we proceed with the divorce and the restructuring, I can give you shares in the construction company. You can use them as collateral for a new loan. But we need Mom out of the way. She checks the books too closely. She'll see the transfer. My heart ached reading it again. Mallory wasn't just being mean, she was desperate. She was drowning in debt, and instead of throwing her a life preserver, her father had handed her a knife and told her to cut me loose. He used her fear to buy her loyalty. He turned my daughter into his legal hitman. Then there was Tiffany. My baby. The artist. The dreamer. Or so I had told myself. Tiffany was 32 and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. She wanted to be a fashion designer, then an influencer, then a lifestyle consultant. Arthur indulged her. He slipped her cash under the table, bought her cars, paid her rent. He liked being the benevolent king showering his princess with gifts. I was the bad guy. I was the one who said no. I was the one who said, "Get a job, Tiffany. Learn the value of $1." The audio file I clicked on next was recorded 3 months ago in our kitchen. Tiffany and Charlene were drinking champagne. Tiffany, Mom is so embarrassing. She drives that old Honda and wears clothes from 10 years ago. It ruins my brand, you know? How can I be a luxury influencer when my mother looks like a lunch lady? Charlene's voice was smooth, like poisoned honey. Oh, sweetie, I know. You deserve better. You should be in Paris for Fashion Week. Your father wants to send you, you know. He wants to give you a company credit card with no limit. But Tiffany, but Mom won't let him. She controls the accounts. Charlene, exactly. She's jealous of you, Tiff. She's old and dried up, and she hates that you're young and beautiful. If she wasn't in the picture, imagine the life we could have. Shopping trips to Milan. A condo for you in Scottsdale. Real freedom. Tiffany, I wish she would just leave. Or die. God, that sounds awful, but it would be so much easier. I closed the laptop, my hand trembling. Or die. My own daughter. Arthur and Charlene had poisoned them. They had exploited Mallory's fear and Tiffany's vanity. They had painted me as the villain, the gatekeeper, the obstacle standing between them and their desires. But the saddest part wasn't their greed. It was their stupidity. Mallory, the lawyer, hadn't bothered to check the corporate bylaws of Brennan Construction recently. If she had, she would have known that Arthur couldn't just give her shares. And Tiffany, the businesswoman, didn't realize that the company credit card Charlene promised her was tied to an account that was already overdrawn. They had sold their mother for fool's gold. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. It would be the last one I shed for them. They were adults. They had made their choice. They chose the shiny suit and the easy lie over the rough hands and the hard truth. Now, they were going to learn a lesson I should have taught them years ago. Actions have consequences. And when you dance with the devil, you'd better make sure his check clears. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app for the secret trust fund my parents had left me. It was sitting there, untouched, accumulating interest. 7 figures. Enough to start over. Enough to crush them. I transferred a substantial sum to a new operating account labeled Phoenix Rising. You want a lesson in business, girls? I said to the empty room. Class is in session. The next morning, the Arizona sun felt less like a heat lamp and more like a spotlight, exposing the grim reality of my situation. I washed my face in the motel's stained sink, put on my sharpest blazer, one of the few things I had grabbed, and drove to a nondescript office building downtown. This wasn't a place for lawyers or bankers. It was a place for people who needed answers that polite society couldn't provide. The frosted glass door read, J. Miller, Private Investigations. Jim Miller was a retired homicide detective who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in a sandstorm. He didn't offer me coffee. He just pointed to a chair and slid a thick manila envelope across his desk. You're not going to like this, Mrs. Brennan, Miller said, his voice gravelly. I've seen some bad ones, but this woman is a different breed. I opened the file. The first photo was of Charlene, 10 years younger, smiling on a boat with a man I didn't recognize. He looked older, wealthy, and sickly. Husband number 1, Miller said. Frank D'Amico. Real estate mogul in Nevada. Died of a massive heart attack at 52. He was a marathon runner. Healthy as a horse until he met Charlene. I flipped the page. A death certificate. Then a will, dated 2 months before his death. She was his nurse, Miller continued. He tweaked a hamstring, hired her for home care. 6 months later, they were married. 3 months after that, he updated his will, leaving everything to her, cutting out his kids. 2 months later? Dead. Cremated within 24 hours. No autopsy. My hands felt cold. And the second one? Robert Vance. Tech investor. San Diego. Miller tapped a second photo. Another older man, looking pale. Died 4 years ago. Cause of death? Cardiac arrest. He had flu-like symptoms for weeks before he passed. Nausea, dizziness, vision problems. Charlene was his devoted fiancée by then. She inherited $3 million. Nausea, dizziness, vision problems, I repeated, a chill running down my spine. Those are symptoms of digitalis poisoning, Miller finished for me. Foxglove. It mimics a heart attack. Unless you're looking for it specifically in a toxicology screen, it looks like natural causes. Especially in older men with high blood pressure. I stared at the photos. I thought Charlene was just a gold digger. A greedy, vain woman who wanted my husband's money. I didn't realize I was dealing with a predator who ate her mates. Does Arthur know? I asked. Miller snorted. Arthur thinks he's the love of her life. He thinks he won the lottery. Men like your husband, Mrs. Brennan, they have egos so big it blinds them. He can't imagine that a woman like her would want him for anything other than his charm. He pulled out another document. Here's the kicker. I ran a check on Arthur's recent insurance activity. He slid a paper toward me. It was a life insurance policy adjustment request, dated last week. The coverage had been increased to $5 million. The primary beneficiary had been changed from Lorraine Brennan to Charlene Miller, fiancée. He hasn't even divorced me yet, and he's already planning for his death, I whispered. He's not planning for it, Miller said grimly. She is. I felt a wave of nausea. Arthur was a cheater, a liar, and a fool. He had treated me like garbage. But did he deserve to die? Did he deserve to be gasping for air while the woman he loved watched him fade away? He's been complaining of indigestion lately, I said, realizing the memory. He's been tired. He said it was stress from the business. It's starting, Miller said. She's dosing him. Low levels, probably. Weakening him. Once the divorce is final and the assets are transferred, she'll up the dose. One big shock, and his heart gives out. She plays the grieving widow, takes the $5 million plus the company, and moves on to victim number 4. I sat back, the weight of the revelation crushing me. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was an attempted murder investigation. What do we do? I asked. Do we go to the police? Not yet, Miller shook his head. We have circumstantial evidence. Patterns. But no proof she's dosing Arthur. If we go to the cops now, she'll lawyer up, claim harassment, and disappear. Or worse, she'll accelerate the timeline and kill him tonight to destroy the evidence. He leaned forward. We need to catch her in the act. We need proof she possesses the poison, or proof she's administering it. You still have those cameras in the house? I do, I said. But Arthur changed the Wi-Fi password when he kicked me out. I can't access the feed. I can fix that, Miller said. I have a tech guy. If the cameras are still powered on, we can hack back in. But Lorraine, you need to understand something. He looked me dead in the eye. You're playing a dangerous game. If she finds out you know, you become a target. This woman doesn't leave loose ends. I stood up, clutching the file to my chest. I thought about Mallory and Tiffany. If Arthur died, Charlene would take everything. My daughters would be left with nothing, no father, no inheritance, just the debt they had accrued. I wasn't saving Arthur for Arthur's sake. I was saving him because he was the only thing standing between my children and destitution, and because I refused to let a murderer win. Let's get those cameras back online, I said, my voice steady. Arthur kicked me out of his house, but he's about to find out he can't kick me out of his life. Not while I hold his life insurance policy. I walked out of the office into the blinding light. The stakes had changed. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity or my money anymore. I was fighting a monster. And unlike Arthur, I wasn't blinded by ego. I saw her exactly for what she was. Armed with the terrifying knowledge of Charlene's history, I drove to the outskirts of Phoenix to meet my hidden weapon, Sylvia. Sylvia wasn't just an accountant, she was a forensic accountant with a mind like a steel trap and a grudge against cheaters that rivaled my own. We met in her home office, a converted garage stacked floor to ceiling with paperwork. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Lorraine," Sylvia said, pouring me a cup of strong black coffee. "Worse," I said, placing the Mont Blanc pen on her desk. "I signed the papers, Sylvia. Just like we planned." Sylvia picked up the copy of the divorce settlement I had photographed before leaving the house. She scanned it, her eyes darting behind thick glasses. Then, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "Oh, Mallory," she chuckled. "She really thinks she's clever, doesn't she?" "She put in a non-compete clause," I said. "Banned me from working in construction within 500 miles for 5 years. Which is not worth the paper it's printed on in Arizona," Sylvia waved a hand dismissively. "We're a right-to-work state. Unless you're sharing trade secrets, which you won't be, technically, they can't stop you from earning a living." Mallory copied a boilerplate contract from the internet, probably from a template used in New York or California. Amateur hour. "And the asset division?" I asked. "This is the beautiful part," Sylvia pointed to paragraph 4. "It states that you relinquish all claims to current assets held in joint accounts and company shares. It explicitly lists the accounts. See here?" I looked. The list was comprehensive. The checking account, the savings, the investment portfolio. "But," Sylvia continued, tapping the desk, "it doesn't mention previous assets that were legally separated prior to the marriage or inheritances kept in separate trusts. And since you never commingled your parents' inheritance money with the marital funds." "It's mine," I said. "All of it." "Every cent," Sylvia confirmed. "Arthur thinks he stripped you bare because he assumes you were dumb enough to put that money in the joint pot. He doesn't know you have a war chest of $1.2 million sitting in a trust he can't touch." "But here's the trap," Sylvia said, her expression turning serious. "Mallory included a clause about debt assumption. It says the primary operator of the business, Arthur, assumes all liabilities associated with the company." I nodded. "That sounds standard." "It is, usually. But Mallory didn't disclose the extent of the liabilities. She's been hiding debt in the company books to cover her own losses. By signing this, Arthur just legally agreed to take on Mallory's hidden debts. He thinks he owns a company worth $10 million. In reality, once the creditors come calling and the audits happen, he owns a sinking ship." I felt a pang of pity for Arthur. He was being eaten alive by the women he surrounded himself with. His daughter was framing him for her debts, and his mistress was planning to kill him for his insurance. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We wait," Sylvia said. "Let the ink dry. Let the divorce decree be finalized by the judge. It usually takes 60 days in Arizona for the cooling-off period. During that time, you do nothing. You let them think you're defeated. You let them get comfortable. And then? Then we trigger the audits," Sylvia said. "I've already prepared the whistleblower packages for the IRS and the State Contractors Board. Arthur has been claiming personal expenses as business write-offs for years, the cars, the vacations with Charlene. It's tax fraud. Once we send these..." She mimed an explosion with her hands. "But Lorraine," she added, looking at me with concern. "Are you sure? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Brennan Construction will be destroyed. The legacy you built, it'll be gone. I thought about the company. I thought about the first truck. I thought about the smell of wet concrete and the pride I used to feel seeing our sign on a new building. Then I thought about Arthur holding that divorce paper. I thought about Tiffany laughing at me. I thought about Charlene dosing Arthur with poison. The company wasn't a legacy anymore. It was a crime scene. Burn it down, I said softly. Arthur destroyed the legacy the moment he betrayed me. I'm just clearing the rubble. Good, Sylvia said. Now, about your future. You can't just sit in a motel room for 2 months. You need a job. You need to show the court you're moving on, living a modest life. I made a call, I smiled. Diane Sterling. Sylvia's eyes widened. Sterling Construction? Arthur's arch-nemesis? You're kidding. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, I said. Diane has been trying to break into the commercial sector for years. I have 30 years of contacts and the goodwill of every supplier in the state. Arthur has a mistress and a hangover. Diane is a shark, Sylvia warned. I know, I replied, standing up and smoothing my blazer. But I'm not a minnow anymore, Sylvia. I'm the one bringing the bait. I left Sylvia's house with a lighter step. The legal trap was set. Arthur had signed his own doom, thinking he was signing mine. He had agreed to take on the debt, the fraud, and the failure. I had walked away with the clean money, the expertise, and the freedom. Now, all I had to do was survive the next few months while the poison, both literal and metaphorical, worked its way through Arthur's life. 3 weeks after my departure, the cracks in Brennan Construction began to show. Not hairline fractures, but gaping structural failures. I knew this because Hector, my former foreman, called me every night with updates. He was still technically employed there, though he was planning to quit as soon as I gave the word. He was my eyes and ears inside the crumbling kingdom. Mrs. B, it's a circus over here, Hector told me one evening, his voice low. Arthur showed up at noon today. Smelled like a distillery. He fired the safety officer because the guy refused to sign off on that cheap scaffolding Charlene ordered. Cheap scaffolding? I asked, gripping the phone. For the Scottsdale high-rise? Yeah. Charlene found a supplier in Mexico. Said it was 40% cheaper. The stuff is garbage, Lorraine. It's rusted. It won't hold the load. I told Arthur, but he just said I was being negative and that Charlene is optimizing costs. Optimizing costs, I scoffed. She's optimizing a lawsuit. If a worker gets hurt. I know, Hector sighed. I shut down the site myself. Told the crew to go home. Arthur went ballistic. He's screaming about insubordination. He says he's going to run the site himself tomorrow. He hasn't run a site in 20 years, I said. He doesn't even know the current OSHA codes. That's not the worst of it, Hector hesitated. Tiffany came in today. Oh God, I rubbed my temples. What did she want? She wanted to do a photo shoot. For her brand. She brought a bunch of models onto the active site in high heels and bikinis. They were posing on the excavators, Lorraine. While the engines were running. I closed my eyes. It was a safety nightmare. An insurance liability disaster waiting to happen. Did Arthur stop her? Stop her? He was holding the reflector screen, Hector groaned. He thinks it's modern marketing. Then Tiffany tried to pay the models using the company payroll system. When the accountant, poor Linda, told her she couldn't do that, Tiffany fired her. On the spot. She fired Linda? Linda had been with us for 15 years. She knew where every skeleton was buried. Yep. And get this. Mallory stepped in and said she'd handle the payroll from now on. Through her law firm's escrow account. I almost laughed. It was perfect. Mallory was integrating the company funds directly into her money laundering scheme. She was making it incredibly easy for the FBI to trace the connection. Let them do it, I told Hector. Document everything. Take photos of the rusted scaffolding. Take photos of the models on the equipment. Get written statements from Linda about her firing. I'm on it, boss lady, Hector said. But, are you sure you're okay? It's hard watching them wreck your work. It's hard, I admitted, looking around my small, tidy motel room. But it's necessary. A building with a rotten foundation has to come down before you can build a new one. The next day, the first major blow landed. The city inspector visited the Scottsdale site. Usually, I handled inspections. I knew the inspectors by name, asked about their kids, made sure our paperwork was impeccable. This time, Arthur handled it. Hung over. With Charlene by his side, wearing a hard hat that still had the price tag on it. According to Hector, the inspector found the substandard scaffolding immediately. Then he found the electrical wiring violations, another cost-saving measure by Charlene. Then he asked for the permits for the design changes. Arthur didn't have them. He tried to charm the inspector. He tried to offer him tickets to the Suns game. Attempting to bribe a city official is a bad idea. Doing it while your mistress is arguing that safety regulations are just government overreach is suicide. The inspector issued a red tag. Stop work order. Immediate shutdown of Brennan Construction's biggest project. Fines totaling $50,000 a day until rectified. My phone blew up with texts from former employees. Did you hear? Arthur shut us down. Are we getting paid this week? I didn't answer them yet. I sat on my bed and watched the local news. There was a short segment about the shutdown. They showed a clip of Arthur shouting at the camera crew, looking disheveled and angry. This is a misunderstanding, he yelled. My ex-wife, she messed up the paperwork before she left. I'm cleaning up her mess. I sipped my tea. Blame me, Arthur, I thought. Put it all on the record. It just proves you were incompetent enough not to check the work for 6 months. The cracks were spreading. The money was drying up. The employees were terrified. And amidst the chaos, Charlene was whispering in Arthur's ear that it was all just bad luck, pouring him another drink, and likely adding a few drops of something else to the glass. It was time to meet Diane. I needed to secure a lifeboat for my crew before the ship went under completely. Diane Sterling was known in Phoenix as the Queen of Concrete. She ran Sterling Construction with an iron fist. We had been rivals for decades. She had stolen contracts from us, we had stolen contracts from her. Arthur called her a ballbuster. I called her competent. Her office was in a glass tower downtown. It was sleek, modern, and intimidating, everything Brennan Construction pretended to be. When I walked into her conference room, Diane didn't stand up. She sat at the head of a long marble table, reviewing blueprints. She looked up, her gray hair cut in a sharp bob, her eyes assessing me like I was a load-bearing wall. Lorraine Brennan, she said, her voice dry. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did Arthur send you to spy on my bids? Arthur fired me, I said, placing my briefcase on the table. And is currently divorcing me. Diane paused. She took off her glasses. I heard rumors about a red tag at the Scottsdale site. I assumed Arthur was just being his usual incompetent self. But he fired you? The only person over there who knows a pile driver from a pile of dirt? He replaced me with his mistress, I said. And his daughters. Diane threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, barking sound. Oh, that's rich. That is absolutely rich. Arthur always was a fool for a pretty face, but I didn't think he was suicidal. He is, I said. And the company is going down with him. Which is why I'm here. You want a job? Diane asked, narrowing her eyes. I don't hire charity cases, Lorraine. Even if I do respect you. I don't want a job, I said. I want a partnership. I opened my briefcase and slid a folder across the marble. Inside that folder are letters of intent from 3 of Brennan Construction's biggest clients. The Miller Hospital expansion. The Desert Resort project. And the new municipal library. Diane opened the folder. Her eyebrows shot up. These are multi-million-dollar contracts. Why would they jump ship to me? Because they trust me, I said. And they know Arthur is spiraling. I told them I was moving to Sterling Construction. If you take me on, they come with me. And the catch? Diane asked. I want a senior VP position. I want 20% equity in the commercial division. And I want to hire my own crew. Specifically, Hector and 12 of my best guys from Brennan. They need jobs, and you need skilled labor if you're going to take on this extra workload. Diane tapped her pen on the table. You're asking for a lot, Lorraine. You're 60. You should be retiring, not starting a war. I'm not starting a war, Diane, I leaned forward. I'm finishing one. Arthur tried to erase me. He said I was old. He said I was useless. I want to prove him wrong. And I want to do it from an office that looks down on his. Diane studied me for a long moment. She saw the anger in my eyes, but she also saw the capability. She saw the $1.2 million in potential profit I had just laid on her table. You know, Diane said slowly. I never liked Arthur. He undercut me on the stadium bid in '98 by using non-union labor. I've been waiting for a chance to bury him. She stood up and extended her hand. Welcome aboard, partner. We shook hands. Her grip was firm, rough like mine. One condition, Diane said. I have an empty office on the 20th floor. Corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows. It faces directly west. West? I smiled. Towards Brennan HQ, Diane grinned. You can watch the demolition from your desk. Deal. Walking out of Sterling Construction, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just Arthur's ex-wife anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I was the senior vice president of the largest construction firm in the state. I pulled out my phone. I had one more call to make before the day was over. It was time to give the right to work law a real test. Hector, I said when he answered. Pack your tools. And tell the boys to pack theirs. We start on Monday. And Hector? Tell Arthur I said thanks for the training program. The stage was set. I had the new job, the new power, and the evidence. Arthur was bleeding money, bleeding talent, and literally bleeding from the poison his mistress was feeding him. Now, all that was left was to wait for the final collapse. And thanks to my new view from the 20th floor, I would have a front row seat. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, the kind where the Arizona sky turns a bruised purple and the heat finally breaks enough to let you breathe. I had just finished a site visit with Diane at our new project, a luxury wellness center in Scottsdale. I was wearing a hard hat, yes, but I was also wearing a silk blouse and driving the company car Diane had insisted on, a pearl-white Lexus SUV with leather seats that smelled like success. I stopped at AJ's Fine Foods on the way home. In my old life, Arthur would complain if I shopped there. Too expensive, he'd say, while pouring himself $100 scotch. Go to the discount mart, Lorraine. Watch the budget. Now, I bought what I wanted. Imported cheese. Fresh figs, a bottle of crisp Sauvignon Blanc. I was in the produce aisle, inspecting a melon, when I heard a voice that made my skin crawl. I'm telling you, it's not my fault the accounts are frozen. It's a bank error. It was Arthur. I froze for a split second, my instinct to hide kicking in. But then I remembered, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the cards. I straightened my spine, smoothed my blazer, and turned the corner. There they were. Arthur looked diminished. That was the only word for it. His usually impeccable suit was wrinkled at the elbows. His face was gray, his eyes rimmed with red. He was leaning heavily on the handle of the shopping cart, his breathing audible even from 5 feet away. Charlene stood next to him. She wasn't glowing. The glamorous younger woman looked frantic. Her roots were showing, a cardinal sin in Scottsdale, and she was snapping at him in a hushed, vicious whisper. Fix it, Arthur. I need that transfer to go through. My contractor is threatening to walk off the remodel. I'm trying, Char, Arthur wheezed, rubbing his chest. I just need to. I need to sit down. Then, they saw me. The silence that stretched between us was thick enough to choke on. Arthur's eyes widened. He took in my appearance, the designer shoes, the glowing skin, the air of calm authority. He looked at my basket, filled with luxuries. Then he looked at his own cart, frozen dinners, cheap beer, and antacids. Lorraine? Arthur croaked. Hello, Arthur, I said, my voice cool and pleasant. Charlene. You look tired. Charlene bristled, her eyes narrowing into slits. We're fine. Better than fine. We're celebrating, actually. Arthur just closed a huge deal. Is that so? I asked, glancing at the frozen lasagna in their cart. I heard the red tag on the Scottsdale site is costing you $50,000 a day. That must be quite a deal to cover those losses. Charlene's face went pale. How do you know about that? I have friends, I said simply. Phoenix is a small town. Arthur stepped forward, or rather, shuffled. He looked at me with a strange mix of anger and desperation. You look good, Lorraine. I feel good, Arthur. It's amazing what happens when you cut out the dead weight. Charlene stepped between us, puffing up like a threatened cobra. Don't talk to him like that. You're just jealous. You're a lonely old woman living in a motel. Actually, I smiled, shifting my basket to my other arm. I closed on a condo in the Biltmore yesterday. Cash. And I'm not lonely. I'm busy. Sterling construction is booming. Sterling? Arthur choked. You're working for Diane? I'm a partner at Sterling, Arthur. And we just picked up the Miller Hospital contract. I believe that was yours? Arthur swayed. His face turned a terrifying shade of pasty white. He reached out to steady himself on a display of apples. Lorraine, we need to talk. The girls, they're struggling. Mallory said you won't answer her calls. Mallory is an adult, I said cold-heartedly. If she needs money, maybe she should ask her father. Oh, wait. The accounts are frozen? It's a glitch. Charlene shrieked, drawing stares from other shoppers. A temporary glitch. I stepped closer to Arthur, lowering my voice so only he could hear. I smelled the stale alcohol on his breath, mixed with the sickly sweet scent of Charlene's perfume. Arthur, I said softly. You look sick. Really sick. Have you seen a doctor? It's just stress, he muttered, clutching his chest. Indigestion. Right, I said, looking pointedly at Charlene. Just stress. Be careful what you eat, Arthur. And what you drink. You never know what's in it these days. Charlene's eyes snapped to mine. For a second, I saw genuine fear. She knew I knew. Or she suspected. That paranoia was exactly what I wanted. Goodbye, I said. I walked past them to the checkout. As I paid, I watched them through the glass storefront. They walked out to the parking lot. Charlene marched ahead, not waiting for Arthur. Arthur trailed behind, clutching his chest, looking lost. They got into his car, a leased Mercedes that I knew was 2 payments behind. I walked to my Lexus. I pressed the unlock button, and the lights flashed a cheerful greeting. As I drove away, watching them argue in my rearview mirror, I felt a twinge of sadness. Not for the marriage, that was dead and buried, but for the man Arthur used to be. He was a husk. A walking corpse. He didn't know it yet, but I was the only person in the world trying to save his life. And the only way to save him was to destroy him completely. October arrived, bringing slightly cooler mornings and the heavy, electric atmosphere of impending doom. While Arthur was battling his indigestion and Charlene was battling the contractors who were walking off her remodel job, I was sitting in my new office at Sterling Construction, finalizing the kill shot. Sylvia sat across from me. We weren't looking at blueprints today. We were looking at 12 large manila envelopes. Are you ready? Sylvia asked. Her voice was somber. We both knew that once these envelopes entered the postal system, there was no turning back. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore, this was prison time. I'm ready, I said. We went through them one last time. Envelope 1 to 3, the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Inside was a detailed forensic audit of Brennan Construction's books for the last 5 years. It highlighted the business expenses that were actually vacations, jewelry, and luxury cars. It documented the cash payments to undocumented workers to avoid payroll taxes, something Arthur insisted on doing against my advice. But the crown jewel was the evidence of the offshore account Charlene had convinced Arthur to open in the Cayman Islands. They thought it was hidden. Sylvia had found the wire transfers in 3 hours. Envelope 4 to 6, the FBI White Collar Crimes Division. This was for Mallory. It contained the escrow account records from her law firm. It showed the pattern: client funds moving in, sitting for 2 days, and moving out to shell companies controlled by her crypto guru boyfriend, then bouncing back to Brennan Construction as consulting fees. It was textbook money laundering. Mallory wasn't just unethical, she was a felon. Envelope 7 to 9, the Arizona Registrar of Contractors. This package contained the photos Hector had taken. The rusted scaffolding. The frayed wiring. The falsified safety reports signed by Arthur. This would strip Brennan Construction of its license permanently. Envelope 10, the Phoenix Police Department Homicide Division. This was the heaviest one. It contained the file Miller had compiled on Charlene. The death certificates of her first 2 husbands. The toxicology reports Miller had managed to dig up from an old connection at the coroner's office in Nevada, reports that had been overlooked at the time but showed elevated potassium levels consistent with digitalis poisoning. And, crucially, the USB drive containing the video clip I had recovered from the cloud backup of my home security system, Charlene, in her bathrobe, grinding white tablets into a fine powder and stirring them into Arthur's protein shake at 6 a.m. Envelope 11, the Insurance Fraud Bureau. Proof of the policy change on Arthur's life insurance, cross-referenced with the dates of his deteriorating health. Envelope 12, a personal note. This one wasn't going to the authorities. It was addressed to Charlene Miller. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy but unmistakable still from the video of her spiking Arthur's drink. On the back, I had written 3 words: I know everything. The timing is crucial, Sylvia reminded me. The package to Charlene needs to arrive after the authorities have been notified, but before they make the arrests. We want her to panic. We want her to make a mistake. She'll try to run, I said. Or she'll try to finish the job. Miller has a team watching the house 24/7, Sylvia assured me. If she tries to give Arthur anything, they intervene. If she tries to run, they tail her. We just need to light the fuse. I picked up the stack of envelopes. They felt heavy, like bricks. These were the lives of my family. My husband. My daughter. I was mailing them into oblivion. I thought about Tiffany. There was no envelope for her. Not because she was innocent, she was a thief and a brat, but because she was irrelevant. Without Arthur's money and Mallory's legal cover, Tiffany would collapse on her own. Her punishment would be life itself. I drove to the main post office on Van Buren Street. I didn't want to use the office mailroom. I wanted to do this myself. Standing at the counter, the clerk weighed each envelope with bureaucratic indifference. "Certified mail?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Return receipt requested." I watched him stick the green labels on each one. Thump. 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 The sound of justice. Or maybe the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. When I walked out of the post office, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was done. The missiles were in the air. I went back to the office and stood at my window on the 20th floor. I looked west, toward the squat, beige building that housed Brennan Construction. I could see Arthur's car in the lot. I wondered if he was drinking his protein shake. I wondered if he felt the walls closing in. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mallory. "Mom, please. Dad is really sick. He can barely walk. The doctors can't figure it out. He needs you. We need money for specialists. Please call me." I stared at the screen. The doctors can't figure it out. Of course they couldn't. Charlene was a nurse. She knew exactly how to mimic heart failure. I didn't reply to Mallory. Instead, I forwarded the text to Detective Miller. "Add this to the file." "Exigency," I typed. "God help you, Arthur," I whispered to the glass. "Because I've done all I can." The dominoes didn't fall silently, they crashed with a sound that echoed all over Phoenix. It started on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after I mailed the envelopes. I was in a meeting with the architects for the Miller Hospital project when my phone lit up with a breaking news alert. FBI raids downtown law firm in money laundering probe. I excused myself and walked to the break room where the TV was always on. There it was. Live footage from a helicopter circling the glossy high-rise where Mallory worked. The camera zoomed in on the ground level. FBI agents in blue windbreakers were carrying out boxes of files. Computers. Servers. And then, they brought out the people. My heart stopped for a second when I saw her. Mallory. My firstborn. The girl who used to practice her debate team speeches in front of the bathroom mirror. She wasn't wearing her power suit armor today. She was in handcuffs. Her head was down, her hair shielding her face, but I recognized the posture. It was the slump of defeat. A reporter on the ground was breathless. Sources say this is connected to a massive fraud scheme involving cryptocurrency and local construction assets. Mallory Brennan, a junior partner, is being taken into custody along with 2 others. I watched as an agent guided her into the back of a black SUV. She looked small. Terrified. For a moment, she looked up at the camera, and her eyes were wild. She was looking for a savior. She was looking for her daddy's money or her mommy's protection. But daddy was broke, and mommy was the one who called the cops. I turned off the TV. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a fierce, protective anger. Not protective of Mallory, but of the law. She had betrayed her oath. She had stolen from the very people she was supposed to represent. She had stolen from me. My phone rang. It was Hector. "Mrs. B," he said, his voice urgent. "You need to turn on the radio. The registrar of contractors just hit the Brennan job sites. All of them. They're padlocking the gates." "I know," I said calmly. Did you get your guys out? Yeah, we walked off Monday like you said. But Arthur. Mrs. B, Arthur is there. At the main yard. He's freaking out. He's screaming at the cops. He looks like a madman. Is Charlene with him? No. That's the weird part. Nobody has seen Charlene since yesterday. My blood ran cold. The package. She must have received the package. Hector, I said sharply. Stay away from Arthur. Let the police handle it. I need to call Miller. I hung up and dialed the detective. He answered on the first ring. We missed her, Miller said without preamble. She wasn't at the house this morning. We tracked her phone to the airport, but she didn't get on a plane. She dumped the phone in a trash can at Terminal 4. She's running, I said. Or she's doubling back, Miller warned. Lorraine, where are you? I'm at Sterling Tower. 20th floor. Security is tight. Stay there. We have an APB out on her vehicle. And we have units heading to Arthur's house. If she thinks she's burned, she might try to liquidate the last asset. Liquidate the asset? Arthur, Miller said grimly. If he dies before the fraud charges stick, she might still think she has a claim on the life insurance. She doesn't know we've flagged the policy. I paced my office. Mallory was in a holding cell. Tiffany was probably hiding under her bed. And Arthur was alone, sick, and bankrupt, with a killer on the loose. My secretary knocked on the door. Ms. Brennan? There's a young woman in the lobby. She's hysterical. Says she's your daughter. Tiffany. Send security, I said instinctively. But then I paused. Tiffany wasn't dangerous. She was useless. And right now, she was probably the only source of information I had on what was happening inside that house. No, I corrected myself. Send her up. But have security stand outside the door. 5 minutes later, Tiffany burst into my office. She looked like a wreck. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, her designer dress was wrinkled. Mom, she wailed, throwing herself onto my sofa. They took Mallory. I saw it on TikTok. And the bank, my cards don't work. The guy at Starbucks cut my card in half. Sit down, Tiffany, I said, staying behind my desk. You have to fix this, she screamed, her face blotchy. Daddy isn't answering his phone. Charlene isn't answering. The house is locked. I can't get in to get my shoes. Where am I supposed to sleep? You're 32 years old, Tiffany, I said. Figure it out. Figure it out? I don't know how to do anything, she sobbed, a pathetic admission of truth. Charlene said we were going to be rich. She said you were the problem. She said. Tiffany stopped, sniffing. Mom, Charlene was acting really weird yesterday. She was packing. She told me to get out of the house because she had to fumigate 4 pests. Fumigate? I asked sharply. Yeah. She had all these plastic sheets. And she was messing with the gas line to the stove. She said she was fixing a leak. My heart stopped. Messing with the gas line. Plastic sheets. She wasn't running. She was staging an accident. An explosion to cover the murder and the fraud. If Arthur was in that house. Tiffany, I said, grabbing my purse. Stay here. Do not leave this room. I dialed Miller as I ran for the elevator. She's not at the airport. She's at the house. And she's going to blow it up. Leaving Tiffany in my office was like leaving a toddler in a boardroom, but I had no choice. As I rode the elevator down, my mind raced. The fumigation story was a classic cover. Charlene was setting the stage for a catastrophic gas explosion. It would destroy the evidence, the forged documents, the poisoned supplements, and Arthur. It would look like a tragic accident caused by a confused, sick man trying to fix his own stove. I sped toward my old neighborhood in the Lexus, ignoring the speed limits. The phone connected to Miller's dispatch. "We're 2 minutes out," Miller's voice crackled over the Bluetooth. "Fire department is rolling. Do not approach the house, Lorraine. If there's a gas leak, a doorbell ring could spark it." I pulled up to the end of the street, my street. The street where I had taught Mallory to ride a bike. The street where I had planted the jacaranda trees that were now blooming purple. It was quiet. Too quiet. Arthur's Mercedes was in the driveway. Charlene's car was gone. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the wheel, watching the house that used to be my sanctuary. It looked normal. The sprinklers were running. But I knew inside, the air was likely thick with mercaptan, the smell of rotten eggs that warns of natural gas. While I waited for the sirens, my phone buzzed. It was Tiffany, calling from my office landline. "Mom," she sounded small. "The FBI guys, they're here. At Sterling. They want to talk to you." "I'm busy, Tiffany." "No, Mom, they're asking about me. About the bulldozers. They have pictures of me selling them on eBay." "Mom, am I going to jail?" The reality was finally hitting her. The bubble of entitlement had popped. "Did you sell them, Tiffany?" I asked, watching a police cruiser turn the corner onto the block silently, lights flashing but siren off. I borrowed them. I was going to pay it back once my brand took off. That's called theft, Tiffany. Grand larceny. And yes, you might go to jail. But I'm pretty, she wailed, a sentence that summed up her entire worldview. I can't go to jail. It's dirty. Mom, please tell them I'm just a kid. You're a grown woman who stole $50,000 of heavy equipment to buy handbags, I said, my voice trembling with the stress of the moment. I can't fix this. I won't fix this. You wanted to be an adult, Tiffany? Welcome to the real world. I hung up. The police were surrounding the house now. They were moving tactically, staying low. I saw Miller get out of an unmarked car. He was wearing a vest. Then, I saw movement in the side yard. The gate unlatched. A figure slipped out, carrying a heavy duffel bag. She was wearing a painter's jumpsuit and a mask. Charlene. She hadn't left. She had been inside, setting the trap. She was sneaking toward the alleyway where she must have parked a rental car. I honked my horn. I laid on it. Beep. 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 Charlene froze. She looked toward my car. Even from 50 yards away, I saw the panic in her eyes. She's in the alley. I screamed out the window, pointing. She's in the alley. Miller turned, saw her, and shouted orders. 3 officers sprinted toward the side of the house. Charlene dropped the bag. For a second, I thought she surrendered. But then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver. A lighter. She looked back at the house. She was close enough to the gas meter. If she had rigged a leak. Drop it! Miller screamed, his gun drawn. Charlene hesitated. She looked at me, then at the house, then at the police. She realized it was over. The explosion wouldn't save her now, there were too many witnesses. She threw the lighter on the ground, unlit, and raised her hands. As they tackled her, handcuffing her face down in the decorative gravel I had chosen 10 years ago, I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhaustion. Then, the front door opened. Arthur stumbled out. He was wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt. He looked confused, blinking in the sunlight. He swayed, took 2 steps, and collapsed onto the porch. "Arthur!" I screamed, jumping out of the car. "Stay back, Mrs. Brennan," a fireman yelled, running toward Arthur with a gas meter. They dragged Arthur's limp body away from the house to the middle of the lawn. Paramedics swarmed him. I stood at the police tape, watching them cut open his shirt. "Pulse is 30, a medic shouted. "Bradycardia. Heart rate is 30. Possible OD. It's digitalis." I shouted over the tape. "She poisoned him with digitalis. Tell them." The medic looked at me, then shouted into his radio. "Administering Digibind. Prepare for transport." I watched them load the wreckage of my husband into the ambulance. I looked at Charlene, being shoved into a police car, spitting and screaming at Miller. And back in my office, my daughter Tiffany was realizing that being pretty wasn't a legal defense. The house stood silent. It hadn't exploded, but the family inside it had been obliterated. The waiting room at St. Joseph's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a smell that triggered memories of childbirth, of broken arms from childhood bike accidents, of waiting for Arthur during his hernia surgery. But this time, I sat alone. There was no Mallory to pace the floor with her phone. No Tiffany to complain about the lighting. Just me and Detective Miller, who had come to take my statement. "You saved him," Miller said, closing his notebook. "The paramedic said if you hadn't yelled about the digitalis, they might have treated him for a standard heart attack. The wrong meds would have killed him instantly." "Is he going to make it?" I asked, staring at the double doors of the ICU. "Hard to say. The toxicity levels were off the charts. She must have given him a massive dose this morning. Probably in that protein shake we found on the counter." Miller leaned forward. "We found the gas line cut in the kitchen. And a candle timer set in the living room. She was going to blow the place sky high. Arthur was supposed to be asleep, or dead, when it happened." I shivered. "Did she confess?" "She's lawyered up. But we have the video from your USB. We have the pills in her duffel bag. We have the lighter. And we have the text messages on her burner phone confirming the purchase of the drugs from a supplier in Mexico. She's done, Lorraine. Attempted murder, arson, fraud. She's looking at life." "And Arthur?" I asked. "What happens to him if he wakes up?" Miller's face hardened. "He's under arrest, Lorraine. There's a guard outside his room right now. The fraud charges stand. The tax evasion stands. He might be a victim of attempted murder, but he's also a perpetrator of a multi-million-dollar theft." "I know," I said softly. A doctor emerged from the double doors. He looked tired. "Mrs. Brennan?" I'm his wife," I said. The divorce wasn't final yet. Technically, I was still his next of kin. "He's stable," the doctor said. We pushed the antidote. "His heart rhythm is normalizing. He's awake, but very weak. He's asking for you." I looked at Miller. He nodded. "Go ahead. But keep it brief." I walked into the ICU room. The machines were beeping rhythmically. Arthur lay in the bed, looking small and frail. His skin was the color of parchment. He had aged 20 years in 6 months. When he saw me, tears welled up in his eyes. "Lorraine," he whispered. His voice was a rasp. I stood by the bed. I didn't take his hand. "Charlene." He choked out. "She tried to." "I know," I said. "She tried to kill you, Arthur. For the insurance money. The $5 million policy you signed over to her." Arthur closed his eyes, a tear tracking into his ear. I was so stupid. She said she loved me. She said I was strong. She said you were an easy mark, I corrected him. And you proved her right. The girls? He asked. Mallory is in federal custody. Tiffany is being questioned by the FBI. The house is a crime scene. The company is gone, Arthur. It's all gone. He began to sob. It was a pathetic, wheezing sound. I'm sorry, Lorraine. I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I just wanted. I don't know what I wanted. You wanted to feel important, I said. You wanted to be the king. Well, you're the king of a pile of ashes now. Help me, he begged, reaching a trembling hand toward me. Please, Lorraine. You always fix it. Fix this. Get me a lawyer. Get me out of here. I'll sign anything. I'll give you everything back. I looked at his hand. The hand that had put a ring on my finger. The hand that had signed the papers to kick me out of my own home. I can't fix this, Arthur, I said. I'm the one who turned you in. He froze. His eyes flew open. What? The IRS. The FBI. The State Board. I sent the packages, Arthur. I gave them the books. I gave them the emails. You? He gasped. But, why? Because you broke the contract, I said steadily. Not the marriage contract. The human one. You tried to destroy me. You turned my children into criminals. You let a shark into our home. I leaned in close. I saved your life today, Arthur. If I hadn't called the police, you'd be a pile of ash in the basement right now. So, consider your prison sentence a gift. At least in prison, you're alive. I turned to leave. Lorraine, he screamed, the monitor beeping faster. Don't leave me. I have no one. I stopped at the door. You have exactly what you invested in, Arthur. Nothing. I walked out. I didn't look back. The sound of his sobbing followed me down the hall, but it sounded distant, like a radio playing in another room. I had survived the fire. He was just starting to feel the burn. The downfall of Arthur Brennan was not the quiet, dignified exit of a titan. It was a public spectacle, broadcast in high definition on the evening news. 3 days after his hospitalization, Arthur was discharged. He didn't go home, he couldn't, the house was seized by the IRS. He didn't go to a hotel. He was wheeled out of St. Joseph's Hospital in a wheelchair, wearing a gray sweatsuit, directly into a waiting police van. I watched it from the break room at Sterling Construction. The camera crews were merciless. They zoomed in on the handcuffs. They zoomed in on his confused, terrified face. Arthur Brennan, formerly a pillar of the Phoenix construction community, has been indicted on 24 counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy, the news anchor announced. This comes just days after his daughter, attorney Mallory Brennan, was denied bail due to flight risk concerns. Diane walked into the break room and handed me a cup of coffee. She watched the screen for a moment. You know, she said thoughtfully. I always wanted to see him take a fall. But seeing him like that, it's almost pathetic. It is pathetic, I agreed. But it's also necessary. The Anderson contract just came through, Diane changed the subject, ever the businesswoman. They want you to lead the project. They said they only trust Lorraine's team. Tell them yes, I said. And tell Hector he's getting a raise. That afternoon, I went to the federal detention center to deal with Tiffany. She wasn't in jail, yet. She had been released on her own recognizance because she had cooperated fully. Which meant she had sung like a canary, blaming everything on Mallory and Arthur. I met her at a diner near the courthouse. She looked different. The fake eyelashes were gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, clothes I recognized from high school, probably dug out of a forgotten box in the garage before the feds locked it up. "Mom," she said, not looking at me. She was picking at a plate of fries. "Tiffany. I have to do community service," she mumbled. 500 hours. And probation for 3 years. And I have to pay back the $50,000. How are you going to do that? I asked. I got a job, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. At the mall. Not at the fashion stores. At the pretzel stand. It's the only place that would hire me with a pending record. I looked at her. My influencer daughter, twisting pretzels for minimum wage. It's a start, I said. Mallory hates me, Tiffany said, tears dripping onto her fries. She called me from jail. She said I was a snitch. She said she's going to rot in there while I serve pretzels. Mallory made her choices, I said. She used her law degree to steal. You were just stupid, Tiffany. Being stupid isn't a felony, usually. But being greedy is. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't money. It was a brochure for a local community college. If you finish your probation and keep the job, I said, sliding it across the table. I will pay for classes. Real classes. Business. Accounting. Learn how the world actually works, Tiffany. Not the fantasy world Charlene sold you. Tiffany looked at the brochure. She looked at me. You're not going to help me with rent? No, I said. You're living in a shelter, right? It's awful, she sobbed. Someone stole my shoes last night. Then work harder, I said, standing up. I lived in a motel for 6 months, Tiffany. You'll survive. I walked away. It was tough love, the toughest I had ever given. But enabling her had created a monster. Maybe, just maybe, hunger would create a human being. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new condo. The city lights of Phoenix sprawled out before me, a grid of gold and amber. Somewhere in that grid, in a concrete cell, Arthur was sleeping on a thin mattress. Charlene was in a maximum security wing, facing attempted murder charges. Mallory was pacing a cell, realizing her legal career was over before it began. I took a sip of wine. The air was cool. I had destroyed my family. That was the thought that kept nagging at me. I had pressed the button. But then I remembered the birthday. The sneers. The eviction notice. The poison in the protein shake. I hadn't destroyed them. I had just stopped catching them when they jumped off the cliff. My phone buzzed. A text from Hector. Project starts Monday, boss lady. The crew is ready. We got the good scaffolding this time. I smiled. The rubble was cleared. It was time to build. 3 months later, the dust had settled into a grim new reality. The trials were over, thanks to the overwhelming evidence I had provided. There were no long, drawn-out court dramas. Just plea deals and sentencings. I received a request to visit Arthur one last time before his transfer to a federal facility in Nevada. I debated not going. What was left to say? But curiosity, or perhaps a need for final closure, drove me to the visitation center. Arthur sat behind the glass. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair, once dyed a rich chestnut to hide the gray, was now snow white. He looked like an old man. A stranger. He picked up the phone. His hand shook. You look well, he said. It was the same thing he had said at the supermarket, but the malice was gone. Only defeat remained. I am well, I said. Business is good. We just finished the Miller Hospital wing ahead of schedule. He flinched. That was his dream project. Good. That's good. He looked down at his orange jumpsuit. Mallory got 5 years, he said softly. She's in a minimum security camp in Dublin. She wrote to me. She says she hates us both. She'll have time to think about that, I said. And Charlene? Arthur's voice broke. Life without parole. They found evidence connecting her to a third death. A boyfriend in Florida 20 years ago. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I was number 4, wasn't I? You were, I said. You were the retirement plan. Why did you save me, Lorraine? He asked. The question hung in the air. You took everything else. My money. My company. My freedom. My dignity. Why didn't you just let her finish the job? You would have been a rich widow. You would have had the insurance money. It was a valid question. If I had stayed silent that day in the alley, Charlene would be in jail for murder, Arthur would be dead, and I would be the beneficiary of a $5 million policy, since the change hadn't been processed due to the fraud investigation freezing everything. Because I'm not her, I said simply. And I'm not you. Arthur recoiled as if slapped. I didn't want your blood money, Arthur. I have my own money. I earned it. And I didn't want you to die a victim. That's too easy. You don't get to be the tragic hero who was duped by a black widow. I leaned closer to the glass. You get to be the man who threw away a loyal wife for a murderer. You get to live with that. Every day. In a cage. That is my revenge. Your life is my revenge. Arthur stared at me. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He finally understood. Death would have been a release. Survival was the punishment. I have to go, I said, hanging up the phone. Lorraine, he shouted through the glass, his voice muffled. He pressed his hand against the partition. I loved you. In my own way, I loved you. I looked at his hand. I didn't place mine against it. Goodbye, Arthur. I walked out of the prison into the bright, harsh sunlight. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like closure. The gavel came down on the Brennan family saga, not with a bang, but with a series of whimpers recorded in court dockets. Charlene Miller, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state added special circumstances due to the premeditated nature of the attempted murder and the pattern of serial killing. The last image the public saw of her was Charlene being dragged out of the courtroom, screaming that her lawyer was incompetent and that her hair extensions were hurting her. She died alone in a cell, bitter and forgotten. Mallory Brennan, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for money laundering, wire fraud, and embezzlement. She was permanently disbarred. The Arizona Bar Association used her as a case study in their ethics classes, the danger of greed. She would lose her house, her car, and her reputation. When she gets out, she will be a felon with a law degree she can never use. Tiffany Brennan, sentenced to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. She is currently working 2 jobs, the pretzel stand by day and stocking shelves at a grocery store by night. She lives in a studio apartment with 2 roommates. She calls me once a week. We talk about the weather. She asks for money. I say no. But last week, she told me she got in her intro to business class. It's a start. Arthur Brennan, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for tax evasion and conspiracy. The judge was lenient due to his health and the fact that he was a victim of attempted murder, but the IRS was not forgiving. They seized everything. The mansion. The cars. The remaining equipment. Arthur Brennan is bankrupt. He will be 72 when he gets out. He will have nothing but a social security check and the memory of the empire he built and destroyed. Lorraine Brennan, no sentence. Just a new title, Executive Partner, Sterling and Brennan Construction. 2 years have passed since the bloody birthday. My life is unrecognizable. My alarm goes off at 5 a.m., but I don't dread it. I get up, drink coffee on my balcony overlooking the mountains, and go to work in a place where I am respected. Diane and I are a formidable team. She has the aggression, I have the precision. We have doubled the company's revenue. But more importantly, we have changed the culture. We started a scholarship fund for women in trades. The Concrete Rose Scholarship. It pays for trade school for girls who want to be electricians, welders, and foremen. I personally mentor 3 of them. One day, a woman came into my office looking for a job as a receptionist. She was trembling, holding a resume that was 20 years out of date. Her name was Brenda. She had just been divorced by her husband of 25 years for a younger woman. She had nothing. I saw myself in her. I don't need a receptionist, I told her. Her face fell. Oh. Okay. I understand. I need a project coordinator, I said. Someone who knows how to organize chaos. You raised 3 kids and managed a household for 20 years? You're overqualified. I hired her on the spot. Today, Brenda runs our logistics department. She just bought her own condo. Seeing her smile, a real, confident smile, is better than any paycheck. Hector is now our director of field operations. He wears a suit sometimes, but he still carries his own shovel in the trunk. Just in case, he says. I visit Tiffany occasionally. She looks tired. Her hands are rough, like mine used to be. But she has stopped talking about brands and influencers. She talks about rent and tuition. She's becoming a person. A real person. I don't visit Mallory. She refuses to see me. She blames me for her downfall. Perhaps one day she will take responsibility, but I cannot force it. I have learned that you cannot save people who do not want to be saved. It is my 62nd birthday today. There is no tribunal. No divorce papers. No eviction notices. I am sitting at a table in my favorite restaurant, surrounded by friends. Diane is here, raising a glass of champagne. Sylvia is here, cracking jokes about tax loopholes. Hector is here with his wife. Brenda is here. And there is a man next to me. His name is David. He is an architect. He has rough hands and a gentle smile. He knows I am richer than him, and he doesn't care. He knows I am scarred, and he thinks it makes me interesting. We are taking it slow. I am not looking for a savior, and he is not looking for a nurse. We are just 2 people enjoying the sunset. I look around the table. This is my family now. Not the one bound by blood or obligation, but the one bound by respect and loyalty. My phone buzzes in my purse. I check it. It's a notification from the prison email system. Arthur. Happy birthday, Lorraine. I hope you are happy. I look at the message. 2 years ago, reading a text from him would have sent me into a panic. Now, it's just text on a screen. I don't reply. I delete the message. I look up at David. Everything okay? He asks. Everything is perfect, I say. I raise my glass. To fresh starts, I say. To fresh starts, everyone cheers. I take a sip. The champagne is cold and crisp. Arthur and his family thought my story ended at 60. They thought I was a finished chapter. They were wrong. At 60, I didn't end. I just turned the page. And the best part? I'm holding the pen now. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to live through, and it wasn't easy to tell. But if there is one thing I want you to take away from this, it is this: you are never too old, too tired, or too broken to fight back. You are the architect of your own life. If the foundation is rotten, tear it down and build something better. If you enjoyed this story of justice and rebirth, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you've ever had to restart your life from scratch, comment Phoenix below. I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, keep building. And so, as Lorraine's journey comes to a close, we are left with a powerful reminder that life is not defined by the challenges we face, but by the strength we summon to rise above them. This story is not just about betrayal or revenge, it's about rediscovery, resilience, and the courage to rebuild when everything seems lost. Lorraine's life teaches us that no matter how deep the wounds, healing begins when we take control of our own narrative. Her transformation from a victim to the architect of her own destiny is a testament to the power of self-worth and determination. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, we hold the pen to rewrite our story. True strength lies not in avoiding pain but in using it to construct a stronger foundation for the future. What about you? Have you ever had to rebuild your life or rediscover your purpose? Share your thoughts below or simply comment good if this lesson resonates with you. Let's inspire each other to keep moving forward, no matter what life throws our way.